After the Treaty of Paris, the Philippines was subject to the power of the United States of America, effectively the new colonizers of the country. In 1898 to 1901, Philippines was placed under military government until a civil service would be put in place. Acts of the United States Congress. Acts of the United States Congress. Philippine Organic Act of 1902, the first organic law for the Philippine Islands that provided for the creation of a popularly elected Philippine Assembly. Legislative power would be vested in a bicameral legislative. Philippine Commissions, Upper House, Philippine Assembly, Lower House, Key Provision, Bill of Right for Filipinos, appointment of two non-voting Filipinos, resident commissioners of the Philippines. Acts of the United States Congress. Philippine Organic Act of 1916 John's Law modified the structure of the Philippine government through the removal of the Philippine Commission Senate. Upper House and its members, elected by the Filipino voters first truly elected nationwide legislatures. The act also explicitly declared the purpose of U.S. to their sovereignty over Philippines and recognized Philippine independence as soon as a stable government can be established. 1932, with the efforts of the Filipino independence mission led by Sergio Osmeña and Manuel Rojas, United States Congress passed the Her House Cutting Act with the promise of the granting Filipinos independence. The bill was opposed by then Senate President Manuel L. Quezon and consequently got rejected by the Philippine Senate. In 1934, Trading's MacDuffie Act of the Philippine Independence Act was passed by the U.S. Congress that provided authority and defined mechanisms for the establishment of formal constitution by a constitutional convention. Preamble of the 1935 Commonwealth. The Filipino people, exploring the aid of divine providence in order to establish a government that shall embody their ideals, conserve and develop the patrimony of the nation, promote the general welfare, and secure to themselves and their posterity the blessing of the independence under a regime of justice, liberty, and democracy, do ordain and promulgate this Constitution. Commonwealth of the Philippines. It is created by the Constitution as administrative body that governed the Philippines from 1935 to 1946, a transitional administration to prepare the country towards its full achievement of independence. Originally provided for a cameral nation assembly with a president and vice president to 6-year term with re-election. Amended in 1940 to have bicameral Congress composed of Senate and House of Representatives, as well as the creation of an independent electoral commission and limited the term of office of the president and vice president to 4 years with one re-election. Rights of suffrage, originally for female citizen of the Philippines aged 21 years old, over and able to read and write. Later extension for women with 2 years after the adoption of the Constitution. Influences in the Constitution: America, Malolos Constitution, German, Spanish, Mexican Constitution, several South America countries, and unwritten English Constitution. Draft was approved by the Constitutional Convention on February 8, 1935, ratified by the U.S. President Franklin B. Roosevelt. And on March 1935, elections were held in September 1935 with Manuel L. Quezon as the elected President of the Commonwealth. Commonwealth was briefly interrupted by the of the World War II, with Japanese occupying the country. July 4, 1946, Philippines was being declared as an independent republic. The Constitutional Authoritarian. On 1965, Ferdinand E. Marcos was elected as president. On 1967, Philippine Congress passed a resolution calling for a constitutional convention to change the 1935 Constitution. On 1969, Marcos won the re-election in a bid boosted by campaign overspending and use of government funds. On November 20, 1970, elections of the delegates to the Constitutional Convention. On June 1, 1971, the convention was formally started with former President Carlos P. Garcia being elected as convention president. Unfortunately, he died and was succeeded by another former president, Diosdado Macapagal. Before the convention finished its work, martial law was declared. Marcos cited a growing communist insurgency as a reason for the martial law, which was provided in the 1935 Constitution. Some delegates of the ongoing Constitutional Convention were placed behind the bars and others went hiding or were voluntarily exiled. With Marcos as dictator, the direction of the convention turned. Some provisions of the Constitution are dictated. Manipulation of the document to be able to hold on to power for as long as he could. On November 29, 1972, the convention approved its proposed constitution. The constitution was supposed to introduce a parliamentary-style government where legislative power and Cameral National Assembly members being elected to a 6-year term, president, symbolic, and ceremonial head of state will be selected from the members of the National Assembly. Would serve 6-year term and could be re-elected to an unlimited number of terms. Executive power, Prime Minister, Head of Government, and Commander-in-Chief, the Armed Force, who has also to be elected from the National Assembly. Presidential Decree Number 73. It was issued by President Marcos setting the date to plebiscite to ratify or reject by the proposed constitution on November 30, 1973. Was postponed later on since Marcos feared that the public vote to reject the constitution. Instead of a plebiscite, citizens' assemblies were held from January 10 to 15, 1973. Citizens decided on whether to ratify the Constitution, suspend the convening of the Interim National Assembly, continue martial law, or place a moratorium on election for a period of at least several years. January 17, 1973, the President issued a proclamation announcing that the proposed Constitution had been ratified by an overwhelming vote of the members of the highly irregular Citizens' Assemblies. 1976 Citizens' Assemblies decided to allow the constitution of martial law as well as approve the amendments. Entering Batasang Pambansa to substitute for the Interim National Assembly. The President to become the Prime Minister and continue to exercise legislative powers until martial law was lifted and authorized by the President to legislation of own emergency basis. On 1980, the retirement age of member of the judiciary was extended to 70 years. In 1981, the parliamentary system was formally modified to a French-style semi-presidential system where executive power was restored to the president. Executive commitment was to be created composing of Prime Minister and 14 others that will serve as the President's cabinet. Some electoral reforms were instituted. On 1984, the Executive Committee was abolished and the position of the Vice President was restored. The 1973 Constitution was merely a way for President to keep executive powers to abolish the Senate never acted as parliamentary system, instead functioned as an authoritarian presidential system, with all the real power concentrated in the hands of the President with the backing of the Constitution. On 1983, Benigno Aquino Jr., opposition leader and regarded as the most credible alternative to President Marcos, was assassinated while under military escort immediately after his return from exile in the United States. There was a whispered suspicion that assassination came from the top levels of the government and the military. The event caused the coming together of the nonviolent opposition against Marcos' authoritarian regime. Marcos was then forced to hold the snap elections a year early, and said elections were marred by whispered fraud. Marcos declared himself as a winner despite international and nationwide protests. A small group of military rebels attempted to stage a coup but failed. However, thing triggered the EDSA People Power Revolution of 1986. With under the pressure of the United States of America, the Marcos family fled into exile. On February 25, 1986, his opponent in the snap election, Benigno Aquino Jr.'s widow Corazon Aquino, was installed the President of the Philippines.